Midterm Vietnam Business Forum discussed business climate. Investment and trade ties between Vietnam and New Zealand. Hello from Hanoi and welcome to Bizline, brought to you by VTV International. You're with me, Linh Hương, and as usual, we start our show with several highlights from the past week. As scheduled, the Midterm Vietnam Business Forum, or VBF, took place on Tuesday morning in Hanoi. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng, ministers and representatives from foreign business communities attended the event. Reviewing the business climate, representatives of several chambers of commerce pointed out the positive results of implementing Resolution 19 in improving the business environment. Regarding trade, tourism and investment, head of this working group provided feedback on the amended investment and enterprises law, a circular on import of used equipment and some other issues. Meanwhile, the banking group made some key concerns for the sectors, including forex governance, general banking licenses. Suggestions to promote infrastructure through PPP model was the last topic under discussion among delegates. A scientific conference entitled Establishment of a Free Trade Agreement between the Eurasian Economic Community, also known as the EAEC, and Vietnam took place on Monday at the Russian Academy of Sciences. This was the first conference organized after the signing of the Eurasian Economic Union Vietnam Free Trade Agreement on May 29 in Kazakhstan. At the conference, scientists, economists, and business representatives from Vietnam and Russia appreciated the significance of the signed free trade agreement in the EAEC Vietnam economic cooperation. At the same time, experts also provided in-depth views on an array of related issues, including trade in goods, rules of origin, customs, trade defense, intellectual property, as well as the long-term impact of the free trade agreement on Vietnam and the EAEC member countries. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng has signed a decree on Wednesday intending to reinforce and support Vietnamese agriculture. The new decree provides guidance on credit loans dedicated to agriculture and rural development. Following the newly issued decree, functions of Vietnam Bank for Social Policies, Vietnam Development Bank, and commercial banks will be separated in providing loans for farmers. In addition, the document also diversifies borrowers beyond an earlier regulation that restricted support to only those from rural areas. The limit on loans will also be raised. Throughout this year's lychee season, Vietnam will export about 1,000 tons of the fruit to 6 markets, including Japan, Malaysia, France, Australia, Indonesia, and Singapore. This is part of a recent memorandum signed at the Ministry of Science and Technology. The recent memorandum was signed between provincial authorities and representatives from Japanese businesses and Japan's Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries Research Council. It aims to connect companies and businesses from 6 markets of Japan, Australia, Malaysia, France, Indonesia, Singapore to Vietnam's northern lychee growing provinces of Quảng Ninh, Hải Dương and Bắc Giang. Accordingly, the 3 provinces will have to ensure the quality and quantity of lychees ordered by these 6 countries. The central city of Danang has been listed in the top 10 low-cost destinations this summer by the renowned U.S. travel website Skyscanner. According to Skyscanner, Danang is a tropical low-cost destination for adventurous tourists. Tourists will have the opportunity to experience an exciting summer at sea and also enjoy the specialities of central Vietnam. Da Nang has a diverse terrain forming many beautiful natural landscapes. Skyscanner's list of top low-cost destinations this year also includes Malaga in Spain, Nice in France, Antalya in Turkey, Bali in Indonesia, and Orlando in the United States. Those are the highlights in the economic scene for the past week. Up next, we'll talk about the investment and trade ties between Vietnam and New Zealand in our crosstalk. Vietnam and New Zealand will celebrate the 40th anniversary of their diplomatic relations on June 19th. The two countries' bilateral relationship now features regular high-level political visits, expanding trade and business links, ongoing development assistance and cooperation in newer areas such as science and technology, two-way investment, education links and trade in services. On the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the two countries' diplomatic relationship, we have been invited to our studio Mr. Hagen Manning, a New Zealand's ambassador to Vietnam, to discuss the two countries' flourishing economic cooperation. Before we talk, let's check out a few highlights of New Zealand's investment into Vietnam. New Zealand's largest private education provider, the Academic Colleges Group, or ACG, started its investment in Vietnam in 2006 with its Australian International School in Ho Chi Minh City. The school provides an international education for children from kindergarten to year 13. High school students are taught the International Baccalaureates or IB diploma program, which is accepted by universities across the world.
I'll be going to the US States for college. I think the IB is a very strong program. It doesn't just educate you academically, but also with the core, so including the CAS program, it prepares you for to apply your knowledge to the outside world.
IAS now has 3 campuses located in the bustling expat area of Thao Dien and in the new urban neighborhood of Thu Thiem. It's now New Zealand's largest investment in Vietnam and the second largest international investment in Vietnamese education sector to date.
We deliberately built a very large campus, so we have more capacity for growth, and that allows us to grow without having to worry about building extra classrooms. As for the future, again, we believe there's a very bright future for Vietnam and many more opportunities for a company like ACG to expand, not only in Ho Chi Minh City, but further afield.
Besides education, New Zealand companies have invested in Vietnam's IT, dairy, agriculture, wine and food. As of March this year, New Zealand had poured $82 million into 25 projects in Vietnam, ranking 43rd among the 101 nations and territories investing in Vietnam. Vietnamese investment in New Zealand remains humble, but domestic dairy giant Vinamilk has invested in the Miraca milk processing factory in this country. This investment has helped Vinamilk source high-quality milk raw from New Zealand, with the plant producing Twin Cows fresh milk, which is already sold in Vietnam and China.
Chúng tôi đánh giá rất cao cái sản phẩm này, bởi vì thứ nhất là chất lượng sản phẩm của sản phẩm Vinamilk ở New Zealand là đạt tiêu chuẩn quốc tế và tiêu chuẩn của New Zealand. Cái thứ hai, giá bán là hợp lý, và cái nữa là cái bản thân cái thương hiệu Vinamilk đối với người tiêu dùng Việt Nam cũng đã có cái sự thân quen rồi. Và đó là một trong những lợi thế của sản phẩm này khi tiếp cận với thị trường Việt Nam.
The Vietnamese company is now a strategic investor of Miraca with a 19.3% stake. Ambassador Manning, it's a pleasure to have you with us in our show today.
Thank you.
First of all, what do you think about the strengths and weaknesses of Vietnam's business environment?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me on the show today. It's a great pleasure to be back with VTV again, particularly on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between our two countries. In terms of the investment climate and the investment environment here in Vietnam, and I think the first thing to say is that obviously the country is starting to really grow quite well. We're seeing good growth of the economy, and we're also seeing good macroeconomic stability, which I think is really important and something that investors look for. I think in terms of some of the things that investors also look at, they look for regulatory certainty, and they look at things like the transparency of decision making. They look at things like the speed of decision making and the clarity around the rules. And I think all those things are things that Vietnam will continue to improve and will need to improve to really attract all the FDI that it wants to see into the country in the coming years.
Education is another field of strong cooperation between Vietnam and New Zealand. From a commercial point of view, what is the potential of New Zealand investors in this sector?
Education is, I think, one of the most important areas of the relationship between New Zealand and Vietnam. We have more than 2,000 students from Vietnam studying in New Zealand every year. And we also have a number of New Zealand institutions and universities who are active here in Vietnam as well. The flagship investment for New Zealand in the education sector here in Vietnam is the Academic Colleges Group investment in Ho Chi Minh City in the Australian International School. And it's a major investment by New Zealand here in the market, in fact our largest. So we have that, and then there are a range of joint programs that exist between New Zealand universities and Vietnamese universities. And I think that's going to continue to grow these areas, these partnerships in future.
New Zealand's Special Agriculture Trade Envoy Mike Peterson undertook an official visit to Vietnam last year, highlighting the commitments of ongoing development in this sector between the two countries. What is the potential of New Zealand investment in Vietnam's agriculture sector?
We see agriculture obviously as a major strength for New Zealand, and as we look at the development of Vietnam's agricultural sector, Vietnam is really a powerhouse, I think, in the region already in terms of food production, and there's a lot of opportunity for Vietnam to become a real major power in that space. So what we want to do is we want to take some of the knowledge and experience that we have from our farming systems and from our experience with genetics and producing high yield varieties and see if we can apply it here to help Vietnam really improve incomes for farmers and get better returns from its agricultural production. In addition to that, I can see that obviously as we're seeing the entry of a number of major industrial players here in Vietnam into the agribusiness sector, we can see a lot of opportunity to partner with some of those private organisations to really bring the expertise and the skills, for example, in the area of dairy production, where New Zealand is very strong, to provide genetics, animals and embryos and all these sorts of things, and veterinary services. All these types of things are things where we think we can partner successfully with Vietnam for the benefit of both countries.
New Zealand veterinary expert Craig Tanner came to Nghệ An province 3 years ago to work with the TH Chua milk plant here. His job includes taking care of the 20,000 cows imported from New Zealand, as well as assisting his Vietnamese colleagues in learning New Zealand's technology and experiences.
There are a number of steps that we take to ensure that the cows are made as comfortable as we can make them. And a lot of those relate to cooling systems that we have in place in the shed and cooling systems that we have in the milking parlour. It is still something that we are learning about and improving as best we can every day, but certainly from the point of view of cow comfort and best living conditions for the cows, it's something that we are giving very high attention to.
Clever Fruits, a Vietnamese company, has been importing New Zealand apples, kiwis, cherries, and persimmons to supply to the domestic market for the past 4 years. Thanks to the assistance of the New Zealand Embassy and participating in international trade fairs, Clever Fruits can seek trade partners and bring high-quality New Zealand fruits to domestic consumers.
Chúng tôi cũng biết là Đại sứ quán New Zealand, đặc biệt là ngài đại sứ, thì ngài luôn luôn là rất là chủ động trong cái việc là mở rộng cái thị trường về trái cây ở Việt Nam, cũng như là tạo điều kiện cho Việt Nam có thể là xuất khẩu vào New Zealand. Và trong cái thời gian tới thì tôi tin rằng là cũng với một cái tốc độ như vậy thì cả hai nước cũng sẽ mở rộng ra thêm ra, là kéo dài thêm ra cái danh sách mà cả hai bên có thể là xuất khẩu vào lẫn nhau. Và chính vì vậy tôi cũng mong muốn là có thể là như vậy thì chúng ta cũng sẽ xuất khẩu được nhiều hơn vào New Zealand, và New Zealand cũng sẽ xuất khẩu được nhiều hơn vào chúng ta, và như vậy tạo nên những cái hiệu ứng rất là tích cực đối với cả doanh nghiệp cũng như là đối với người tiêu dùng của hai nước.
In addition to dairy products and fruits, other New Zealand's major exports to Vietnam include timber and wood products and seafood. Last year, total exports from New Zealand to Vietnam reached over $478 million. On the other hand, Vietnamese goods exported to New Zealand mainly includes electronics, machinery and equipment, textiles and footwear, furniture, fruits and vegetables, and seafood. In 2014, Vietnam's total exports to New Zealand reached $316 million.
The previous report just mentioned some figures about the bilateral trade between Vietnam and New Zealand. What is your assessment of these numbers and the areas of trade between the two countries?
Well, trade between New Zealand and Vietnam has increased strongly in recent years. In fact, for New Zealand, Vietnam is our fastest growing market in Southeast Asia, and has been our fastest growing two-way trade partner as well. So Vietnam is now our 20th largest trading partner globally, and I think it will continue to become more important in future. And what we're going to see, I think, is we're going to see a continuation of some of those trends that were just mentioned. So it's going to be really strong growth, I think, for New Zealand here in Vietnam in terms of food and beverage. We're going to see increases in exports and things like timber as well, wool, these sorts of intermediate products as well for reprocessing here. And on the other hand, in terms of Vietnam and Vietnamese products to New Zealand, I think we're going to see Vietnamese products becoming more popular, more visible. Everyone already knows about Vietnamese coffee, and they know about Vietnamese cashews and peppers and things like that. Last year, for the first time, New Zealand consumers were introduced to Vietnamese dragon fruit. So these things are going to become, I think, more and more popular, and I think we're going to see probably an increase in textiles and footwear exports to New Zealand. But you know, the number one export from New Zealand, from Vietnam to New Zealand, is now, of course, smartphones produced by Samsung here in Vietnam and then exported to New Zealand.
So what are the future directions of the bilateral trade in the years to come?
I think what's really important to note in this is that there's a real complementarity between what New Zealand exports to Vietnam and what Vietnam exports to New Zealand. So we're not really in competition, and that's why I think the relationship and the trade relationship will continue to grow strongly for the benefit of both countries. And I think the other thing I'd mention as well is just the growth in trade and services, I think, is something also to really watch for. There's professional services in the area of law, architecture, engineering, where I think we'll see growth in the relationship in future as well.
During Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng official visit to New Zealand earlier this year, he and Prime Minister John Key announced that they wanted to double the two-way trade turnover to more than $2 billion by 2020. How can these two countries achieve this goal?
I think the first thing to say is that it's a very ambitious goal, and we're certainly going to work towards it. I think that the key in many ways to achieving this goal is greater awareness of the products that are available in each other's countries, and also much more stronger sort of brand associations with certain things. So in future, we want Vietnamese consumers to be thinking about, when they think about dairy, we want them to think about New Zealand. When they think about education, we want them to think about New Zealand. Likewise, when New Zealand consumers think about tropical fruits in future, we want them to think about Vietnam and the quality that Vietnam can offer in those spaces. So it's about promotion and brand awareness. I think it's really, really important there. We have a good free trade agreement already between the two countries, which provides the base, but then it's about building that base on the basis of awareness and making Vietnamese and New Zealand consumers really interested in what the other country has to offer.
In addition to economic cooperation, the New Zealand Aid Program has been supporting Vietnam in areas of sustainable economic development, human resources management, and disaster risk management. With a focus on agriculture, New Zealand's aid in Vietnam focuses on value-added agriculture and livestock production, developing capacity of small and medium enterprises, and climate-adaptive agriculture. Several notable projects include the $4 million new premium fruit variety development projects and the $2.1 million Bình Định Sustainable Rural Livelihood Project. New Zealand is also providing a $5 million grant contribution towards a $100 million World Bank project to reform land administration in 9 provinces in Vietnam.
Now, in addition to the two countries' economic ties, the New Zealand Aid Program has been assisting Vietnam in sustainable economic development as well as human resources development. Could you share with us the history as well as the results of this program?
Over the last 40 years, we've had a huge range of things that we've worked on with Vietnam in partnership in areas such as education, land reform, forestry, disaster risk management, a whole range of different things, agriculture in more recent times. But in recent years, the focus has really been for us about how we can help farmers lift their incomes. That's what it's all about. It's about how do we help them take what it is they're doing and make it more productive. These days, we have a focus on 3 areas. One is education, one is agriculture, and the third one is disaster risk management. So we have about $10 million a year that we're spending here in Vietnam, and we're looking to continue that in the coming years. But what we're trying to do is we're looking to move into new types of partnership with Vietnam. So one example of a partnership we have going now with Vietnam is research into producing new varieties of dragon fruit in the south of Vietnam. And the idea there is to look at how we can help. We take basically New Zealand experience with producing kiwi fruit and apples, high quality kiwi fruit and apples. We take that experience and that IP, the intellectual property, and we then apply it to dragon fruit. And so over time what you'll see is slightly different tasting dragon fruit, different colours of dragon fruit, and the whole idea is that you produce products which are sought after by consumers, not only here but also in export markets, and that you get better returns for farmers as well. So the partnership is between a New Zealand Research Institute and a Vietnamese Research Institute. They work together and they own jointly the new varieties that they produce. So it's a really exciting type of partnership, and it's the kinds of things we're looking to do with Vietnam in the future.
Vietnam and New Zealand signed a trade agreement in 1994, and then in 2007, Vietnam became a member of the World Trade Organization. And most recently, in 2010, the ASEAN, New Zealand, and Australia Trade Pact was also signed. Other multilateral economic treaties include the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnerships. How have these commitments affected the growth of trade between the two countries?
Well, I think firstly, in terms of the agreements that have already been concluded, like the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, the World Trade Organization, what it's done is it's provided a lot of certainty to traders and investors from both countries. So we now know, as New Zealand businesses, what are the tariffs that we face, what are the import duties that we face. We know that they're coming down over time, and it just gives us much better certainty to know, what we're exporting into as a market here. So it's really important. Also in the area of services, there are commitments there, and in investment, certain investment protections as a result of those agreements. So that's what's there at the moment. Looking ahead to TPP and to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, what they're going to do is they're really going to place New Zealand and Vietnam with the other TPP countries right at the centre of regional integration initiatives. TPP will see, I think, a lot more of New Zealand and Vietnam working together in regional supply chains, and that's the exciting bit. So it won't just be anymore, it won't be New Zealand and Vietnam trading bilaterally, New Zealand, Vietnam, Vietnam, New Zealand. It's going to be much more sophisticated and integrated than that, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities for our two countries to work much more closely together in future.
Well, thank you very much for spending your time with us in our show today.
Thank you.
June 19th this year marks the 40th anniversary of Vietnam-New Zealand diplomatic ties. The two countries have pledged to strengthen their comprehensive partnership in which trade and investment play an important part. Along with a significant boost in trade between the two sides, evidenced by the 120% growth rate in two-way trade in the past 5 years, the bilateral cooperation in many other important areas, including agriculture, education, tourism, and aviation, have also been expanded. And that just concluded our episode of Bizline. Thank you very much for being with us. For more updates, please log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. And goodbye for now from Hanoi.